All right, here we go. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our week or bi-weekly now, every other week live stream where we talk about network automation. This is the NRE Labs live stream where we talk about network automation in general. Sometimes NRE Labs, sometimes just anything about network engineering or network automation. So I'm Derek Winkworth. I am otherwise known as Cloud Toad on Twitter. You can follow me there, and you can follow NRE Labs on Twitter at NRE Labs. And today we have Jay Taylor on. He's also known as at 3 THREE Fiddy FDDI. That's a clever name, by the way. uh, he is at 350 on Twitter, so give him a follow. He's been tweeting some interesting stuff about network automation. That's why we have him on the stream today. So without further ado, um, why don't you tell us a little about yourself, Jay?
Right on. Well, my name's Jay. I've been a network engineer for about 20 years now. Most of that time, I've been working for Cisco VARs doing network and security work. The last couple of years of my world have been pretty much Palo Alto rules for healthcare divestiture for a large healthcare project. And right now, I'm shifting that role from the firewall work to ACI greenfield deployment for the data center build out that we're working on that project.
Oh, okay, sweet. So you're, are you still gonna be? Are you getting away from Palo Alto, or is that something you still have some responsibility for?
I'm sure I'll still have some responsibility because we cover a lot of rules here. We're as consultants at a client, so we'll back other people up, but it's not going to be my primary role. But it's been a fun year. I'll say that after working on Palos for about 18 months, I never want to see an ASA again.
Yeah. Okay. Are you? So you said you have these different roles. Um, do you was did you have to like put firewall rules in and stuff like that, or is it mainly you did a bunch of design work and then did install and validation and you move on to the next thing?
There's been some installation, but it's primarily been around firewall rules. So there've been an organization that has dozens and dozens of firewalls. I would say that only a small handful of them have been under our administration. So most of the work has been around the rule sets to migrate applications from the old company's data center to the new data center here. So once we get the initial setup, there's only been a handful that we've done that we've had to deploy the firewall from scratch. The rest of it's just building the rules to support the application migrations.
Oh, okay. So is that why you sort of got interested in network automation? Like, how did you start in network automation? Let me say that.
So I guess for start, it's been an interesting trip because I've ramped up on Python. I want to say 5 or 6 times now over the last 5 years, and each time it'll be a kind of a learning experience. Build a particular tool to solve a problem, and then completely forget how to do everything that I was doing. So from a consultant perspective, the most use that I originally found was being able to do discovery and collect information. So some of the earliest things I worked on were just simply to be able to get running configs or to get CDP neighbors and things like that from a new network that you're walking in on. Um, I would say that we hope to do some automation with the Palo, but I think we're a long way from doing it at this organization. I think we'll see automation with the ACI deployment long before we see the firewall rules being built out. But in that, I've built small tools just to help with formatting and stuff like that. One of our biggest hurdles with the environment is accessing it all from a virtual desktop. So we're definitely limited on the tools that we have access to. But at least when you're dealing with formatting of set commands and such, you can use some scripts to generate that, and then paste those outputs over to your terminal window in the VHE and save yourself some time that way.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the virtual desktop thing can be challenging if you don't, you can make all the tools in the world, but if they're not going to be that's sort of like a jump point or a I think there's another name, Bastion, right? They call them Bastion servers, where it's a server that you can log into and from which you can now go do things in the infrastructure. And there's a
Mhm.
preset number of tools or things that you can actually do when you're logged into that Bastion box. So you may not have everything you need to do automation from there.
Yeah, at this point, Postman is our number one tool for ACI, and I know that's barely crawling in the terms of automation. It's almost brute forcing CLI commands in mass, but at least it's a tool that we do have for that. We're hoping that we can get to the point where they're still deciding on their automation philosophy, what direction they want to go. It kind of sounds like they're going to go Ansible. So hopefully, once we've got that all in place, we'll have some tools to really scale the deployments.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, Ansible's good. They we have we have a lesson on Entry Labs, I think, around Ansible, or I could be wrong. Maybe it's not up there yet, but if it's not, it should be. But I'm pretty sure it is. Um, okay, so you've done some. I mean, it sounds like you've done some basic scripts. I think it's interesting. You said you had scripts that collected CDP neighbors and like routing information from devices. You know, it seems that would be the wisest thing to automate in network automation because I think you spend most of your time actually modeling what's going on in the network versus actually configuring the network, right?
Hmm.
I think, and when do you model? Well, you model when you're trying to just get a general understanding of what's going on in the network. You're modeling when you're troubleshooting to figure out why something isn't working as expected, and then when you're doing config changes, well, if you did it formally, you would model before you did the changes, and then you would model after you did the changes, right?
Hmm.
So it seems like we spend most of our time actually modeling what's going on in the network. So these scripts that you've written, that makes the most sense, right? To automate those kind of tasks.
Definitely. And I believe you guys talked about it on a previous podcast, was about the modeling your the getting into the monitoring or verification, and those are some of the tasks that you should probably look at automating first before you start trying to push changes, because obviously the verification of that change has to take place. And one of the coolest things I've been looking at lately is the PIATS product from Cisco, or PIATS module from Cisco, for being able to look at changes from a before and after perspective. The way I think I've heard it is being able to diff the network. Going in and as a consultant, if I'm going to make a change to a data center, manually going through or even using a regular diff to compare CAM tables or routing tables or anything else is just too cumbersome of a task on even a couple devices, let alone if you want to model it from an entire data center perspective or WAN perspective. So it's really interesting where they're going with that module, and for the ability to look at the impact of changes.
Nice. Uh, so you've been um, well, I so ACI, it's similar from what I understand. I could be wrong, so you can stop me here. But what kind of like isn't there a lot of maintenance of like lists and things inside of ACI? Like there's these contracts between groups of entities, right? And then you can say, this group can talk to that group on this port, and et cetera and so on, right? You have these relationships between groups of endpoints, um, and or classes of endpoints. So so I imagine there's a lot of lists and other things you have to maintain in order to keep on an ongoing basis, right? Every time there's a change, applications are introduced or refactored or something like that. There's going to be changes, right?
There could be. It definitely depends on the way you go about it. So whether you're trying to accomplish macro or micro segmentation in the fabric itself, through the fabric itself. Um, so our hope, and this is still somewhat being decided from a financial perspective, our hope is that the contracts can be used just for macro segmentation, and they're looking into Cisco tetration for the micro segmentation. So that would take it that further step where the individual hosts can apply the rules for the microsegmentation, and your contracts are just saying that the DB tier can talk to the app tier, and that the app tier can talk to the presentation tier, and that the presentation tier can talk to the users,
Hmm.
without getting it down to a port based level. Because I don't know if you're how familiar with tetration, but that's looking at it from the host OS level and determining what processes are communicating on what ports and what should be allowed.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds cool. It's like a whole bunch of machine learning they did, isn't that
Yep, very
titration? Yeah.
much. Yep. It's a cool product. It's definitely powerful. I hope it comes to fruition because I don't really see it to be manageable if you're dealing with hundreds of applications to manage contracts on a port-based level for complicated applications. When we're dealing with database servers, it's a range of ports. You're not just finding it on one particular SQL or Oracle port. There's dozens of different ports for different instances of the database and things like that. And it also doesn't help that Cisco ACI, when you're dealing with it from a contract perspective, is basically just a stateless firewall. It's just looking at that, or stateful firewall, looking at it at a port level, having the Palo Altos in play. And we do have that for inter-tenant, inter VRF basically communications that you can do application layer inspection to build your rules rather than traditional port based. That makes it a little easier.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Um, yeah, so um, you've been you've been tweeting a lot lately about from this book you've been reading. What's the name of that book?
Well, there's a couple things going on. I had reached out to some people and asked for what's a good advanced beginner book, not starting off at the basics, and I was recommended the Behemoth 1600-page Learn Python. So I'm currently working through that O'Reilly book, but the one I've been working through the most that I'm excited about is Automate the Boring Stuff. And it's not network automation specific, but just Python basics. And it takes it from a perspective of anybody needing to automate boring stuff in their job. So whether it's just moving files around or renaming files or working in Excel spreadsheets, they kind of cover it from an end user perspective of how to get your feet wet in Python and use it for daily tasks. So that's kind of been the latest incarnation of me starting from the ground up to learn Python and remind myself how I'm doing it. I've always been a fan of the best way to learn something is to teach it. So next week we're kicking off a Python study group based on automate the boring stuff at my work. So we're going to have weekly sessions to kind of go through the content and get some people ramped up on the basics.
Nice. Um, did you so you've been like a chapter at a time or one exercise at a time. You've been tweeting a lot about, hey, I did this thing or did that thing. What are some of the things that you really that you've seen in this book and you thought to yourself, I could use this, doing whatever, right? Whatever, any kind of network engineering task that you do, whether it's configuring firewall rules or configuring contracts or whatever it is you're going to configure in ACI. What sort of things have you seen, and not just those things, but anything in general?
I can't say that I've done a whole lot from the network perspective with the automate the boring stuff. I'd say that's more of an entry level hello world, start from there kind of thing. But I've certainly tried to apply concepts. I mean, there's a chapter on working with the requests module, and right now the if Ansible doesn't pan out, my method of dealing with it is going to be just doing pushing JSON payloads with the requests module to deal with ACI builds. So things like that, is the standard kind of modules that people deal with day to day is what I've gotten from that course. Now, the other thing that I've been working through is Kirk Byers' Nornier course that kicked off a couple weeks ago,
Oh,
and awesome course. And so far, I've been able to put that to use a little bit for just some of those same kind of tasks of being able to pull data from a discovery perspective and it works with some cool tools. It's primarily seems to be NetMiko and Napalm based, but when you use things like text FSM and being able to format that output, it becomes a really powerful tool.
cool. So, what are so what kind of tasks would you automate? I'm for a network engineer that's watching this, like let's give them let's take an example of something they might actually have to do, like configuring. They have to create an ACL or a whatever the construct is, right? A firewall filter rule or a policy or something like that. What are some of the things you were thinking that you might automate or apply from?
Um, So yeah, everything in ACI we're doing right now is automated to some extent. Right now it's just through Postman, but we have the ability to do, that can be converted to Python pretty easily once you've got the payloads that you want to work with. But when we build these out, we take a certain amount of hosts that we're going to add to an endpoint group, and we'll start out with a CSV that has all the interfaces, all the hosts, all the VLANs, and all the information that will go into that ACI build, and we push it with Postman, and you push your 100 lines of CSV data through a couple clicks, and we'll do the same thing with the Python scripts in the end. And for that, we're looking at or doing it with the Jinja 2 templating to build out the JSON payloads. But the workflow is basically, and this is still highly manual in a lot of places, but an application owner will come to us with the information required to build out their 3-tier application segment, let's say, and we build out the subnets for it, pop them into that CSV file, populate the interfaces that it's regarding to, and then basically that CSV file is what generates all the object names and links them together with an ACI. So the app ID that we assign to it gets used in a half a dozen different places based on whether it's for the bridge domain or the endpoint group or the app profile and things like that. So that's all automated. That we just push it with a Postman collection, and voila, you have networking.
Nice. Yeah, Postman is kind of funny. It's like a low level tool, right? It's not a thing you import into Python. It's when you don't have a Python library, right, that you can
Yep.
use, or whatever language you prefer. You can, for those that are watching, Postman is an extension for your browser, where you can actually interact with APIs, and you actually can do some pretty cool things with it. You can interact with APIs, and you can scrape websites. You can um, basically learn what the correct API calls are and how to embed, how to structure data in your request, for those API calls, and then how to parse that data when it returns. It helps you do all of that, and you can also actually automate things with Postman, which I think is kind of that's kind of humorous. That you would people choose to do that, because I would never. I just use Postman to discover things.
Yes. And we've already hit the biggest stumbling block with Postman is that there is no option to provide a password. Your password is part of the payload, so it's in a file. And if you're using RSA one-time passwords, there's really not enough time to put your code in, save the file, import the collection, and push it before that passcode expires. So that's really where we've pushed for whether we've got to make that. We're at that fork in the road that they need to decide whether they're going with Ansible or whether we're going to continue with custom scripts.
Yeah, yeah. Does Ansible solve that RSA key problem?
I can't say for Ansible, surely, but at least with Python scripts, I can use getPass to grab the key code that's only good for 10 seconds or 20 seconds or what have you.
Oh, that's cool. So you have like a login ID for RSA for whatever that service is, and then it just does a quick request and comes back and gives you the passcode.
Yep. And then once you got your token, you can, you're good with that token for however long
Yeah,
it
like,
lives.
yeah, 10 seconds or whatever it is.
Well, no, I mean the API token.
Oh, the API token, yeah.
So I don't know how long it lives, but it's long enough that you can push several. It lasts longer than the key code.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that would be an interesting extension uh, to Postman, is using Postman to figure out how to interact with that RSA API to retrieve that code.
Yeah.
That would be interesting.
Yep. Yeah, I've heard most people end up solving that with code that doesn't expire or something horrific from a security perspective like that, and I don't want to go down that road. I know some people get upset enough about using GetPass because technically it's leaving that password in the resident memory, but since the passcode's only good for the 20 seconds, I wasn't too worried about that.
So in this Nornier course, or this automate the boring stuff book you're looking at, do either of these courses give you guidance on how to identify workflows that to automate, or how to define them anyways? Let's say you have one you want to automate. Does they sort of give you guidance on how to break that down, and then do that?
So I'll say from a non-network perspective, automate the boring stuff is great for that because every chapter kind of ends with a example project that he works you through, and then several example project suggestions of how you can take it further. Now, again, it's not network related. It could just be I have all these Excel files and I need to update a cell in them, rename them, and move them here. But those are the kind of things that they go through and give you examples on the things that you could do. So, like filling out web forms, stuff like that becomes an example project of theirs. A lot of working with Excel and CSVs and other Office formats, Word documents. But yeah, those are the kind of examples that they give. Not so much from the Nornier class yet, but like I said, we're on week 3 out of 8, so we're just barely getting beyond the inventory and how to connect with NetNico. So we're still kind of on the basics with that.
Yeah, it's cool. I have a project on the back burner right now where I was thinking about actually using Google Docs to house, people use CSVs and spreadsheets, but Google Docs has an API, and you could easily generate, you could generate, diagrams out of SVG data. You can populate, you can create and populate a spreadsheet with data collected from devices, and you could certainly make a call and pull information down to go and do actual changes and stuff. And that's something I thought would be kind of a cool idea, like creating an automation suite out of Google Docs.
Yeah, I mean, people do it with GitHub, so I'm sure it's possible.
Yeah,
It's interesting when you say about the automation piece of some of that and the APIs, and right now, not a client that I'm working with, but our company is, and right now their biggest headache is assigning IP addresses, and they've got info blocks, and there's really no reason why they can't be using an API to pull those, assign those, whatever they want to do with it, because it's all accessible with info blocks.
yeah. Doesn't their they have this module on their that's right on their box, or that where you can make a call to the box and you can actually install a Python library for that version of that box, right on, wherever you want to install it, and then you could write code against it, right?
That's neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, for them it was just talking about pushing things via the API directly, but yeah, that's pretty cool too.
Oh, like with Postman or something again.
Yeah, yeah, or some automated thing in the back end. I don't know the details on it. It was just their process interacting with that. Like you said about defining a workflow, you got to lay it out of I need to do this before I can do this, before I can do that, and how do I accomplish each of those steps? So somewhere in the middle, their hang up is getting whether it's servers or what have you, IP addresses, and they just need to fit that piece of automation in the workflow.
Yep. Wow. So that, I mean, it sounds like you're there. Have you always been this intense about learning automation, or what really? Because you're doing a few things at once here. You have a couple different books and a course, and it sounds like you're spending a significant amount of time doing it. What sort of spurred this? Um,
So I'll blame Twitter because somebody got talking about 100 days of Python, and I thought, hey, this is a good time to try this again. Um, I won't call them complete failures because all the other times that I've ramped up something, I would say that I had some sort of a product that solved a problem for me at the time, but then it just died off and didn't get used again. So I think with this one, since I'm able to integrate it more directly into my daily work, role, I'm hoping it'll stick. And I've gone through the basics a few times. I'm a big fan of Learn Python the Hard Way, and some of the other beginner courses. And I really only picked up Automate the Boring Stuff, even though a lot of it was very basic review. I wanted something to force me to work on it every day, even if it didn't have a whole lot of meaning or learning something new. I wanted something that was just going to force me to sit down and code for an hour a day. And it's really ramped up from there. Sadly, we had about 900 people join a Slack channel, and I think there's only about 5 of us that are still going. Yeah, I've tried to really stick with it and expand on it and apply it. And like I said, I'm starting that Python study group to hopefully pass on that knowledge and get some other people interested as well.
yeah. When you say practicing an hour a day, that's like really critically important because we absorb so much information, and when you're learning something new, if unless you stay on it like a routine, then your brain will just at least mine does. It just ejects everything that it learns. Like if I learn something on Monday and I don't touch it again until Friday, then I might as well have never done it.
Yeah.
It's like it does not stick. And
And that's
it's
to say, you find so many people in the automation world that they know the building blocks of what they need to accomplish it, but it would take them so long to relearn each building block that they know the high level of it, but it would take them weeks to get back into it to be able to do what they know the high level of. Because if you're not doing it regularly, it's gone.
yeah, it's I tell people all the time when they're first getting started, if you're doing 3 steps in any workflow over and over again, it just 3 steps, right? No matter what it is, if it can be automated, you should try to automate it. Not because it'll change your life or that you would actually end up using that all the time, but just to go through the process of thinking about how to break a workflow down and then actually trying to figure out how to interact with APIs or import the right libraries, etc., and then just get into this mode where you're doing that all the time,
Yep.
and then yeah, and then building on your skill set. I mean, it's the best way, right, to learn how to do it.
Yep. Yeah, like I said about the discovery, you find so many times on projects as a consultant where the infamous one more thing, you get a PM of, oh, we just need to change the banner on these devices. Well, it's 100 devices we deployed. That's obviously going to take time. But aside from the time to make the change, now I've got to collect my as-built documents again because the config changed. And when you think about making a minor change and then recollecting your configurations for 100 plus devices, you're looking at possibly hours of time for each little one more thing that a PM throws over the fence. And those are the kind of easy things that a consultant can do. People look at it as a consultant. It can be hard to deploy automation because you're not going to automate something that you're going to deploy one time. But a lot of those discovery or information collecting practices happen at every client that you interact with.
Yeah, I like to break down some of the information you collect off of devices like into two broad categories. There's host properties, like every router has like normal any network device really, like host names and what SNMP strings and configured DNS server, so that when someone's logged into the management plane, it behaves like a host, right? That's like in those properties, the like sort of global static properties of a device are an easy target if you're starting automation because you don't really have to think about it's not complicated, right? If you dive in and you're like, I'm going to collect all this information from running BGP processes and then build a model with some graph library that that's
That's daunting.
yes, is very daunting, right? And it's good to start with something simple like, okay, here's all my devices and meshes the day, and all those sort of static properties are a great starting point.
Yep.
Making sure that compliance is important, right? So you want to make sure that the banner of the day and or whatever is passwords are encrypted, right? You want to make sure all that stuff is that's extremely useful to do. So
Yep. But yeah, I foresee us getting more and more once they just settle on a path, and I think it'll probably end up being Ansible. We'll end up automating as much as we can of these deployments. I know there's the wish list that an application owner could just drop their request in Salesforce or Remedy Force, and it would automatically populate info blocks and automatically deploy a configuration. All those things are possible, but they're a long way off. So there's a lot of wishful thinking, and I think there'll be some distance between what is hoped for and what we can get implemented. But we're definitely in a position where we don't do a lot of clicking in ACI unless we're discovering how to do something. We
yeah,
don't deploy by that.
cool. So do you have like a formal automation practice in your organization, or do you guys still consider yourself network engineers and you're just sort of picking up this extra skill set?
Definitely the latter, and the client that I'm at likes to outsource a lot. So there's definitely a lot of cooks in the kitchen from different organizations. So on their own, they look to other organizations to help drive that. We're trying to push them in kind of a direction that they want to go for an automation strategy, and we'll see how they go with that. But yeah, as a practice. We my VAR doesn't really have an automation team yet, but we're definitely starting to try to, like with this study group, trying to get people ramped up and see who's going to have the interest to follow through with it, and do something with it that's more of a product.
Nice. Well, you're the automation team now.
That's typically how it goes. And yeah, I was fine with that in a sense because this project won't last forever for me. It's not it's not my main full time job. I still work for a VAR, and at some point this will end. And I'm looking forward to hopefully bringing that back to the VAR and having something that they can sell with it.
Nice. Sweet. Well, sounds like you're on the right path. To get where you want to go. I mean, do you see automation being an important skill set going forward for network engineers, or do you think that we'll mostly end up buying products that just do sort of everything on our behalf?
I think it's always going to be an important skill set because, if we even look back at before network automation was a thing, smart engineers learned how to do automation on some level, whether it be bash scripting or bat files or whatever it may be, to try to automate some of their tasks. So whether that was just creating scripts that would create, routing table entry, static routes, or some piece of a configuration, plenty of us had little snippets of code that solved small problems for us. And I think that's definitely going to continue because there's just too many small tasks that engineers need to be able to have an automated way to do it. But I did see an interesting discussion amongst some high-end networking people that talked about we're getting to a point that maybe network engineers shouldn't be the developers developing products. And if you work for maybe Google or Facebook, I can agree with that. But I think for the majority of networks out there, you're still going to have network engineers writing their own tools. But I see as when you get to the point where you want to make that tool a product that everybody's using collectively, then you kind of need a real developer to build a real product that can go to market in a sense.
Yeah. So when you say that, do you mean even like if you're making tools and you want to share them with your team, do you check those into GitHub? Do you have test units that you run against them, stuff like that, or would that be in your mind like, okay, that's if you want to, do you think a dev would be necessary to do that?
No, I don't think a dev would be necessary to do that. And just the fact that I'm talking about unit testing here, I know Marco will love it because he's the one who's been prodding me on the most that I need to learn unit testing. I would say that as a network engineer, if I'm developing code that others are going to be using, I should probably be unit testing that code. I would say when you want to have a polished front end that people will use, then that's when you want to have a developer that's going to maintain the solution rather than just a script that gets pushed to GitHub.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I That makes sense. Um, all right. Well, I we're actually just about running out of time here. Is there any final thoughts? Anything you'd like to cover?
I'll throw out one of the other things that we were talking about APIs a lot and learning them and being able to play with Postman. And one of the fun tools that I found out there, there's a website called deckofcards. .com, I think that's an API that lets you interact with playing cards from an API perspective. That helped me learn how to deal with APIs quite a bit because Cisco has a sandbox out there of the ACIA pick that you can interact with. But if you don't know what you're doing or where to start with it, that's a pretty challenging thing to interact with an API if you don't even, you have to know the underlying product first.
Yep.
So having something like everybody knows how a deck of cards works. So you could build your own poker game without having to build the logic of the cards themselves. I thought it was cool and it was a good learning tool.
Nice. You know what? Put that in our doc, and then I'll make sure I include that link when we post the recording.
Right on.
All right. Oh. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good, man. Thanks for uh, thanks for coming by, and again, everyone, you can follow Jay while he tweets about everything he's been doing at 350 THREEFDDI on Twitter. Again, I'm Cloud Toad, CLOUDTOAD. You can follow me on Twitter, and of course, you can follow Enery Labs. at NRE Labs. Join our community, community.networkreliability.engineering, and join our Discord, which there's documentation for that on Read the Docs. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks for having me on. Bye.
Take care.